the World Nomads Podcast bonus episode. Hear amazing nomads sharing their knowledge, stories, and experience of world travel.
Welcome to the World Nomads Podcast. If you think it sounds different, that's because it does. We are live on the streets of Melbourne. We've flown down from Sydney to interview who?
Perhaps the most amazing of amazing nomads. This is the man who started it all for many backpackers. If Helen of Troy launched 1,000 ships, then this man has launched at least 1 million backpackers. It's Tony Wheeler, co-founder of Lonely Planet. Let's do it.
We are at the Moat in Melbourne in Victoria, Australia, and we have travelled, in fact, literally, I have caught this morning a ferry, a train, a plane and a cab to speak to who the New York Times says is the godfather of travel among backpackers and the adventurous. Tony Wheeler, how do you respond to that description of yourself? Are you the godfather?
No. I'm just another traveller, basically. But that was a good trip this morning, and I'm immediately thinking you took the train from somewhere in Central to Circular Quay to the airport. Now, last time I was in Sydney, I tried to evade that because, they charge you, what is it, $14 or something to get off the train at Sydney Airport, which is absurd. So I thought, how long does it take to walk to the first station where they don't hit you for the $14? It takes about 20 minutes, I think, to walk to Mascot Station.
We have a friend who lives nearby to the airport. This is... Tilds. And he does that when he arrives at the airport.
The other thing you can do is you can just... you don't save $14, but you can save $6 or something by going to Mascot, getting off the train and getting on the train again.
Okay, thank you.
Which is completely absurd.
Are these the sort of tips that you like to provide?
No, it just annoys me so much,
And this is how the books were born.
Exactly. Well, I paid $18 for your information. Plus $8 on the ferry.
When it should be $2.67 or something.
Well, it should be free. You should. Public transport should be free, and more people would use it, and people would get out of their cars.
And some countries are doing that. I think Estonia has just started doing that.
Well, you're the founder. Let's get into it. You're the co-founder alongside of your wife of Lonely Planet. Absolutely synonymous with anyone that has ever travelled. In fact, you got in at ground level. You predated the digital era. Do you think your story, your life story, would have been different had you thought of a guide, a travel guide, say, in the late 80s?
That was a sliding door thing, I could have done something entirely different. But I don't want to claim that I'm the first at all because, there were Bedeker's guides and Murray's guides a century earlier. And I always think Arthur Fromer, who did Europe on $10 a day, he was a 50s pioneer, just like we were sort of 70s pioneers.
So what was different then? I mean, you weren't the first couple to travel down through South-East. You weren't the first couple to write about it. And you weren't the first people to publish about it. So what was different?
We were... I'm going in a few days' time to someone doing a hippie trail talk. And, of course, there were lots of people on the hippie trail. The only difference is that we made a business out of it. That's the only thing, really. And I guess it was that, we were there at the time. It was the baby boomers were travelling. The hippie trail was taking them further than they'd gone before. The jumbo jets were taking off. There were all sorts of things that made things work. And we just happened to be somebody who jumped on the wagon.
What was the moment where you go, I like this, on the cheap book that we've written? When was the moment where you said, let's make a publishing empire?
Which looked like a cheap book too, by the way.
It was a cheap book, yeah. I mean, the first book was an accident. We didn't sort of set out thinking, we're going to do this trip, we're going to do a book about it, we're going to create a business. It was just, we did the trip, then we thought we should do a book about it, and then when the book was successful, which it was, we thought, here's an opportunity.
I know why you're so across spending money in Sydney, because when you first arrived there, you had 27 cents. So you would have been looking at budgeting. That wouldn't have got me. I would have had to walk all the way from the airport. You would have to. So what did you do when you arrive in a city? 27 cents.
Look for a job. What you do is, if you have something, if you only have 27 cents, you're stuffed. But, if you've got a camera, which I did have, or something you can, flog. You walk up to the cross, as we did, and you find a loan shop, and they give you $25 for your camera.
What does $25 buy you?
Well, this is a long, long time ago. It bought us a room for a week for $16. You could get a room in Sydney for $16.
I'm just thinking of, do you know the movie Dr. Strangelove? When the plane is flying over Russian territory and they're going through the emergency rations. It's like 2 packets of chewing gum, a packet of nylons, $25 in cash, 25 rubles, and the actor goes, "Shoot, a guy could have a good time in Vegas on this."
Yeah, very much that way. We had still a few dollars left to buy some food, but then Maureen got a job that afternoon, so. And working in a milk bar, and milk bars, you get to bring the food home at the end of the day if it's perishable and isn't eaten. And
so what year was that?
72, end of 72, right at the very, very last couple of days of 72.
And I'll just point out again, we are live at the Moat in Melbourne with Tony Wheeler, from the co-founder of Lonely Planet, not yours anymore. As Phil said at the start, you built a multi-million-dollar empire, so you haven't had to fill out an application for a job or knock on the door of a milk bar. No. How's it changed your life?
Enormously. I don't have to. In fact, it kind of worries me that maybe it makes you lazy, because, I do write articles and, do this and do that, but I don't have to. And I sort of think maybe, if I was, I need another $500, I better write a story for somebody and get $500. It would push you to do more if you had a little bit of financial urgency. I don't have to do anything.
When you first sat down and grabbed your coffee, Phil asked you what you're doing these days, and you were able to reel off 7 or 8 things that were fairly
I'm not getting bored. No, I'm not getting bored. No.
And not bored of travel?
No, I still really enjoy travel. In fact, if I had more time, I'd do more of it.
Do you travel differently, though? Or do you still like travelling the old way?
Well, I talk about the standard questions I get asked, and one of them is what is your favourite place? Then the next number 2 is what is the most dangerous thing that's ever happened to you? And the third is there somewhere you never want to go to again? And then the fourth usually is you used to travel on $5 a day. Do you still do that?
I wasn't talking about $5 a day, but I was talking about way and the things that World Nomads stands for, like connecting with the locals and, getting out there and getting off the beaten path.
I really rather like at the end of every year, I look back on I'm terrible. I keep, boxes for everything and note everything down. I can't stop doing that. So I can look back over the year and say, what was the most expensive hotel I stayed at? And there's usually something, you've gone somewhere and it's way over $500 a night. There was one in Miami a year or 2 ago. It was over $1,000. And I said to them at the end, why is this place so expensive? And they said, this is happening or that's happening. But then equally, there will be somewhere in the year where there has been somewhere for $5, because that was the only place in town. And that year it was a Mission guest house in the Solomon Islands.
All right, well, which one was better, $1,000 a night? Or?
Oh, they're both great.
Okay.
You are a living, breathing version of my favourite saying, look after the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves. So it doesn't matter how much money you've got, you don't just blindly pay $12 for a bottle of water in a minibar in a hotel.
I hate doing that.
Yeah.
I hate doing the $12. I don't mind, if I was somewhere where, you really need to try this wine and it's $50 a glass, I'd say, yeah, I should try it. And I'd pay the $50. But if it was $12 for a bottle of mineral water out of that's terrible. There's a tap over there.
Yeah, that's right. It is a major rip-off. Okay, this question I want to ask you, because it's just an example of how determined you are, I guess, and a little bit, for me, it's a little bit crazy. Tell us about what happened, not necessarily North Korea, because we've spoken to people that have told us that it's not real and they've described their experiences. But you went to the DMZ, or the DMZ. And I would like you to share that story, because
I think I've shared it too many times. But
but
I went
first
down
time for us.
And it's a wonderful name, isn't it? The demilitarized zone, where you've got 2 armies, facing each other off, ready to launch nuclear war if Donald Trump lifts the phone on each other. It's so far from DMZ or DMZ as you can possibly get. It's just ridiculous. But there is, they've got two buildings facing each other across the ceasefire line, and the South Koreans are backed up by the Americans are on one side and the North Koreans are on the other. But then right in the middle they've got this little hut, and the hut is where they meet to discuss putting off World War III. And there's a door into the hut from both ends. One door from the North Korean end and one door from the South Korean end. And in the middle of the hut is a table with chairs around it that they can sit around. And the dividing line goes right through the middle of the table. So, one end of the table is in North Korea and the other end of the table is in South Korea. And you can go into this, and I won't go into the hut from North Korea. I've come down from Pyongyang, and I go into the hut, and there's two North Korean soldiers guarding the door into South Korea, so you cannot escape into South Korea. But you can walk around the table, and you can go to North Korea, South Korea, North Korea. You can sit on the dividing line and have one leg in North Korea and one leg in South Korea. It's completely absurd. And there was an occasion some years back when the Russians were still around, when some Russian tourists came in there, and one of them decided to make a break for freedom and, push the North Korean soldiers aside. And the door's not locked, opened the door and burst out into South Korea. Well, then the North Koreans and South Koreans started shooting at each other. And I think 5 people died. Oh, no. Not the escapee. The Russian woman got away, but, 5 North and South Koreans killed each other.
Well, you were determined to walk through that door, though.
Oh, yeah. I thought, geez, I have to come in that other door. But you can't walk around the hut and come in the other door. The only way to get from the North Korean door round to the South Korean door without dying is to go back to Pyongyang, go back to Beijing, go from Beijing to Seoul, take a tour from Seoul up to the DMZ again, or DMZ, and, come in from the South Korean door. And then you're in the hut, the same hut, but now you've got a South Korean guy doing this sort of taekwondo pose, stopping you escaping into North Korea.
And that's when the North Korean soldiers said, "Not you again."
There were no North Korean soldiers. Well, they can look in the window. They can look in the windows from the North Koreans.
Hey, come here! I think it's that Tony bloke that we had a couple of weeks ago.
The South Koreans photograph you. It's just wonderful.
Borders fascinate me.
So, me too.
And the fact that you can step over a border, which seems to have some sort of political significance, but in actual fact is an imaginary line in the air. I love borders.
I do too. I think they're completely wacky, and and there's all sorts of them. The Indians and the Pakistanis have that one that they close every night and do all the marching back and forth, and that's an absurd border. But there's crazy borders all over the place.
And that horrible little no man's land in between border posts, which is, where all horrible things can happen if you get stuck in there. Yeah.
I know the other one that I've seen just recently is the border between the two Cypresses.
Right, which is starting to come down a bit, though, isn't it?
Well, it's sort of come down. It was totally closed off for many years, and now you can. And I've only been there once. I went there late last year. And, I stayed on one side. And there were a couple of nights I was staying on the Republic of Cyprus side. And I used to wander over into the Turkish side to have a beer and a meal and then come back. So you cross this border. And the border is a border line at places. But there are some places where it's, a couple of 100 metres wide. And it does actually, there is one place where it's the whole airport wide. The old airport is in this no man's land.
Can we get back to the books? Anyone that has ever travelled has had a Lonely Planet book.
Yeah, probably.
I reckon I'd like to do a survey.
There's 6 degrees of separation. Here in Melbourne, everybody you ever meets either worked for Lonely Planet, their brothers work for Lonely Planet or sister, their schoolmate, their flatmate.
Yeah.
6 degrees.
Well, in my early days of travel, it was the go-to book. Okay, I'm thinking of going to Japan, better go and buy the Lonely Planet book on Japan, and wouldn't do anything outside of what was featured in the book. It's like
that was a big advantage that LP had, is they had a book on everywhere. So, if you go into the picture, I'm going to go somewhere, your Lonely Planet will have one. So, that was rough guys used to complain about that.
Yeah. Which leads to this question. How did you feel about people ripping the appropriate chapters out and only taking those?
Yeah, it's great.
Because that's what everybody did, right? Just take the bit you want.
Tear them up, then you need to buy another one next time. And now you can just download the chapter you want, which is what I do.
I know you're not part of Lonely Planet anymore, but I had a look at some of the books on the weekend, and there are a lot of hard copy now, so almost more like coffee table books.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's been the biggest. I mean, the two areas that have. It's been 10 years now since I left, and we did travel with children books. We did. I think there might have been a couple before I left, but I was never a great believer in it. But now it's a whole separate division, for all these children's books. They've got a children's book publishing. And the other thing, as you say, is all these coffee table books. Every time I turn around, there's another one. Unbelievable.
You say that with a little bit of disdain.
Yeah, maybe I do. I don't. It's fine. I think it's a really good thing they're doing it if it makes money. What I used to really like about it, to some extent, and that's just the world has changed. When I said about staying at a $5 a night mission place in the Solomon Islands a couple of years ago, and I found that in the old Lonely Planet Solomon Islands guide, but it wouldn't be there today because that whole sort of island group gets a paragraph where it used to get 10 pages, and that's justifiable because nobody goes there. And you can't. We used to do it because we were stupid.
Yeah.
You've got to make.
It's beautiful, Solomon Islands.
It is lovely, and I've only been there a few times, but I've really enjoyed it. But there aren't enough people going there. You can do lots of things that the small audience would absolutely love it, but you can't do it just because a small audience loves it. You've got to sell it to lots of people, and that's realistic. And I can totally understand that. It's not a charity, it's a business.
Nice segue, though. Speaking of charity, after you left Lonely Planet, you set up a foundation.
Well, we didn't actually, because that was there at Lonely Planet.
Oh, right, okay.
I mean, it was called the Lonely Planet Foundation, and it was there within Lonely Planet, and it had a couple of, office space, a desk or whatever at Lonely Planet, and a couple of people who were Lonely Planet employees working for it. But we couldn't very well sell Lonely Planet and say, and by the way, you've taken over philanthropy. So we pulled that out and set it up separately. So essentially, the Planet Wheeler Foundation is the old Lonely Planet Foundation.
Right.
And explain what it does.
It does really the same things that it did as Lonely Planet. It does education and health in the developing world. And that's mainly in Southeast Asia and Africa. And it's really, the balance is shifting more to Africa and less to Southeast Asia because Southeast Asia can look after itself in many ways.
You were not pioneers of guidebooks, but were you, like on the leading edge there of setting up these sorts of foundations to look after people as well?
No, I don't think so at all. I think there are lots of people who do lots of good things and, and keep a very low profile about it.
What do you think of the modern-day travel blogger? The couples that are in their 20s that decide, I don't want to sit in an office 9 to 5.
Well, I think of two things in this. One is I'm speaking at a thing in Boston in June. A guy called, he calls himself Nomadic Matt.
Matt Klepnis, yeah.
Yeah. So he's putting on something in Boston, and I'm going over there to speak at that. There was a young couple who stayed with. They were friends of friends who stayed with Maureen and I last year for a couple of weeks when they were in Melbourne. And I think they'd be defined as influencers. That's the word, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And I couldn't understand what the hell they were doing at all. It went right over my head. But I mean, bloggers, influencers, they're all out there, aren't they?
It's a living, and some people make a great living at it, And
one of the questions I often ask our bloggers, it's not my standard go-to, but when you're travelling somewhere, and the reason why you're not behind a desk anymore is because you want to travel, what are your eyes doing? What are you looking for? Are you looking for the story? Are you looking for the photo? Are you immersing yourself?
Well, I think people who are doing that definitely are, looking at how can I flog this? How can I influence this? How can I take photographs, videos of it? And thank God I haven't got to do that.
Listen, when we were just getting set up before, you mentioned in passing that you... you've lived in Melbourne for a long time, but you said it was kind of by accident.
Yeah, well, when I first turned up in Australia, it's the other end of the hippie trail. It starts in London. Kathmandu is the midway point, or the finish line in one direction, or whatever. And Australia is the other end. So we started off from London. We ended up in Australia, and we intended to stay for 3 months, but we ended up staying for a year. And we stayed that year in Sydney, as you do. And at the end of that year, we started out heading back to London. And after a year, we got as far as Singapore and wrote the second book. And then we sort of thought, now what do we do? And we thought, why don't we have another year in Australia? Because we'd left Australia thinking we'd left forever. And we'd packed all our stuff up in a suitcase and, mailed it back home. And... thought we were following after it. So we then U-turned in Singapore and came back to Australia, and we thought, we had a year in Sydney, let's have a year in Melbourne. So we came down to Melbourne for a year. Here I still am, many, many years later. So it was a total accident. If it had been the other way around, if I'd gone to Melbourne first, we'd be doing this in Sydney today.
Well, it would have been cheaper for me.
Yeah, especially that train ride to the airport.
I've lived in various cities for 12 months, which is long enough to say. I lived in Paris for a year once. I lived in San Francisco for a year. And both of them, at the end of that year, if someone said, you can't go home, your passport has been, banned for, you've got to stay here in Paris or San Francisco, I'd have said, fine. I like it. This is good. It wouldn't have bothered me.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, as the Godfather, not self-professed, this is what the New York Times say about you, the Godfather of...
I'm looking for the violin case.
Backpacker and adventure travel. What pearl of wisdom or pearls of wisdom can you leave our modern-day traveller with?
Oh, travel light, that's far and away. Every time I see someone dragging this enormous bag around behind them, it's everyone starts off doing that. You think, I need this, I need that, I need something else. You don't. You soon find out you don't. I'm about to fly to Europe in 10 days' time, and I will have a lot of stuff with me for assorted reasons. But generally, I travel everywhere with a carry-on bag.
Thank you so much for taking time to chat to us. And
I'm glad I let you get some frequent flyer miles.
And it'll be worth the cab back, the flight back, the train back, and the ferry all in reverse.
And the cup of coffee here was
the cup of tea. Thank you.
I'll pick the coffees up.
Thank you very much.
Problem.
Well, that wraps up our chat with Lonely Planet co-founder Tony Wheeler, recorded here live in Melbourne.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks to the coffee, Tony. Next week we're back in the studio exploring Tonga. In the meantime, if you know someone who loves travel as much as you do, please tell them about us.
Yep, you can find the latest episode through all the popular podcast apps and players, but one of the easiest ways we reckon to listen is just to go to worldnomads.com/podcast. You said that Tonga is next week.
Indeed. See you then.
Amazing Nomads. Be inspired.